"You should not have come here," the guard said, and he did not look at her when he said it. That was the first thing Serafina Voss noticed as she stepped through the iron gates of Drakkar Keep, the seat of the most powerful Alpha King to have ruled the northern territories in 3 centuries. The guard's eyes slid away from her face the moment they found it, the way eyes always did when they encountered something they could not quite categorize, something that unsettled the neat filing systems. People used to organize their world. She was not beautiful in the way that made men confident. She was beautiful the way a storm was beautiful, and most people preferred to admire storms from a great distance. "I was sent," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. Not because she was afraid, though she was, but because the cold here was different from the cold she had grown up with. It reached inside her chest and pressed against something ancient and sleeping, and she did not want to disturb it. The guard finally looked at her then, a quick assessing glance, and what she saw in his expression was the thing she had seen all her life in the faces of strangers who learned what she carried inside her. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. Reverence edged with revulsion. The same look people gave sacred things they would rather not be responsible for. Her name was Serafina Voss, and she was 23 years old, and she was being discarded. She understood this, as clearly as she understood anything. Her father, Alpha Gregor Voss of the Northern Reaches, had spent 23 years building walls around the problem she represented, and now those walls had crumbled because the problem had grown too large to contain. 2 months ago, in front of 40 members of their pack gathered for the autumn equinox ceremony, her wolf had refused to submit to him. Not attacked, not threatened. Simply refused. Stood in the circle of firelight with her enormous white head raised and her pale eyes fixed on Gregor Voss with an expression that every wolf in the clearing had recognized as something between pity and dismissal, the way a queen might look at a man who had wandered into her throne room and sat in her chair without understanding what he had done. The humiliation had been complete and public and utterly unrepairable. So now she was here, 300 miles from everything she had ever known, delivered to the court of Alpha King Kalen Drakkar, with a letter of introduction that she was quite certain, based on everything she knew about her father, contained language very carefully designed to make her disposal seem like a gift. She had read the letter. Of course she had. She had very few advantages in this world, and the ability to pick a lock was one of them. What the letter actually said, beneath the layers of diplomatic courtesy her father's scribe had applied like thick paint over rot, was this: "Here is a problem I cannot manage, and do not want, and I am giving her to you because you are the only person in the world more powerful than she is, and I am hoping very much that you will solve her for me." The word solve had not appeared in the letter. The sentiment had been unmistakable nonetheless. Serafina had read it twice, folded it carefully back along its original creases, and replaced the wax seal using a technique she had learned at the age of 11 from the pack's former spy master, who had not known he was teaching her at the time. Then she had climbed into the carriage her father had sent for her and watched the northern reaches disappear through the small cold window. And she had promised herself 2 things. First, that she would not cry. Second, that whatever happened in the court of Kalen Drakkar, she would not allow herself to be solved. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The keep was older than any structure she had ever seen. The northern reaches had buildings that had stood for 2 centuries, and they were considered ancient by the people who lived in them. But Drakkar Keep had the particular quality of stones that had been present for so long they had stopped being architecture and had become something more like geology, formations that had simply always existed and would continue to exist long after the people who moved through them had turned to dust. The main courtyard alone was larger than the entire central square of the trading town nearest her father's territory, and it was filled with movement, soldiers and servants and wolves in their shifted forms moving through the cold morning light, with the practiced efficiency of a place where power was exercised as naturally as breathing. She had expected to feel overwhelmed. She had prepared herself to feel overwhelmed. What she had not prepared herself for was the way the keep made her feel calm, a deep resonant stillness that settled over her like a second skin the moment she crossed through the outer gate, as though some part of her that had been vibrating at the wrong frequency, her entire life had suddenly found its correct pitch. She did not have time to examine this feeling before a woman appeared from the main entrance to the keep and walked toward her with the brisk, purposeful stride of someone who had a great many things to accomplish and considered unnecessary conversation an obstacle to those accomplishments. The woman was perhaps 40, with silver-threaded dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been beautiful once and had since refined itself into something more useful, all sharp angles and watchful eyes. She wore the gray and silver of Drakar's household staff, but she wore it the way generals wore their uniforms, as evidence of authority rather than service. "Serafina Voss," she said, and it was not a question. "I am Mira. I manage the Alpha King's household. You will follow me." There was a pause, precisely long enough to be pointed. "Unless your wolf has objections." Serafina felt the creature inside her stir at the words, not with aggression, but with something she could only describe as amusement, which was not an emotion she had previously associated with her wolf. "No objections," she said carefully. "Good," Mira said, and turned back toward the keep without waiting to see if Serafina followed. "Then we will begin." What followed was 2 hours of orientation, delivered at a pace that suggested Mira considered any information repeated to be information wasted. Serafina was shown to her quarters, which were small but not unkind, a room with a window that faced east and caught the morning light, and a hearth that had been recently stoked. She was told the rules of the household with the same tone one might use to recite facts about weather, permanent and not worth arguing with. She was told when meals were served and where she was expected to be present, and where she was not. She was told that her status in the keep was technically that of a visiting dignitary from a subordinate pack, which meant she had certain courtesies extended to her and certain obligations expected of her, and that if she was unclear on the distinction between the two categories, she should ask Mira and not guess. She was not told when she would meet the Alpha King. She did not ask. She was learning the rhythms of this place, and she could sense the way her wolf had always allowed her to sense things that other people missed, that asking directly was not how information was gathered here. Here, information was earned. She filed this away and continued to listen. Her first week at Drakar Keep was spent in a state of careful invisibility that she had been practicing since childhood. She attended the communal meals in the Great Hall, where perhaps 60 members of the Alpha King's core household gathered each evening, and she sat where she was placed and ate what was served and spoke when she was spoken to, and watched everything. She watched the way the wolves here organized themselves, the natural hierarchies that expressed themselves, in where people sat, and how they greeted each other, and who deferred to whom, in the subtle negotiations of space that pack dynamics always produced. She watched the king's advisors, a group of 7 older wolves who occupied the seats nearest the head of the great table each evening, moving through their meals with the focused efficiency of people who were always working, even when they were ostensibly not working. She watched the soldiers who rotated through the hall in shifts, still in partial armor, eating quickly and returning to their posts. She watched the servants, who moved through all of it with the practiced near invisibility of people who had learned that being noticed was not always a good thing. What she did not see, for that entire first week, was the Alpha King himself. She heard about him. That was unavoidable. In a pack, the Alpha was always present even in his absence, his influence moving through the social fabric of the group like a current moves through water, shaping everything it touched without being directly visible. At Drakar Keep, this was true, at a scale she had never encountered before. Kalen Drakar was not merely an alpha. He was the king of all the northern wolf territories, his authority acknowledged by every pack from the coast to the inland forests. His word, carrying the weight of law in a world that still organized itself primarily around physical power and ancestral right. Stories about him accumulated in the spaces between her carefully maintained observations, the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of a river. Slowly, consistently, building a picture from small deposits. He had taken control of the territory at 22, when his father died of a challenger's bite that had been infected and gone untreated too long. A death that many considered poorly managed, but which Kalen had responded to by challenging and defeating his father's killer within 48 hours, a feat that had established him immediately as a king not to be tested. He was now 31. He was said to be brilliant and ruthless and fair in roughly equal measure, which was considered the ideal combination for a territorial ruler. He was said to have a temper that he kept tightly leashed, and that when it escaped the leash the results were memorable. He was said to have never chosen a mate, which at 31 was unusual enough to be remarked upon. And the remarks Serafina heard about this particular absence ranged from politically knowing to romantically hopeful, depending on who was doing the remarking. She learned most of this from a young man named Declan, who was one of the king's junior advisors, and who seemed to have been assigned the informal task of making her feel less like a foreign object inserted into the keep's machinery. He was 25, with an easy laugh, and the kind of open face that made people trust him before they had decided whether they should. And Serafina was careful to remember that easy laughs and open faces were frequently deployed by people who were working. She did not assume he was her enemy. She also did not assume he was not. "You want to know about the king," he said one afternoon, when she had been in the keep for 9 days, and they were walking along the inner ramparts in the watery afternoon light. It was not a question. "I want to know about everything," she said, which was true, and also a deflection, because she was not yet ready to let anyone here understand how specifically she had been thinking about Kalen Dracar. "Fair answer," Declan said, and smiled. "He is going to want to see you soon. He has been aware you are here." "I assumed as much," she said, which was also true. "The thing you should understand," Declan said, and his voice shifted slightly, losing some of its ease, and taking on something more careful, "is that he is not going to try to control your wolf. He does not do that. He does not need to." She looked at him. "What does he do instead?" she asked. "He waits," Declan said simply. "He is very good at waiting." She thought about that conversation for 2 more days before she encountered Kalen Dracar for the first time. And when she encountered him, it was not in any of the ceremonial contexts she had been bracing for. It was in the keep's training yard. At dawn, when she had slipped out early because sleep had been impossible, and the wolf inside her had been restless in the particular way that meant she needed open air and movement, or something was going to express itself that she would regret. The training yard was empty at that hour, or she had believed it to be empty, and she had shifted and run the perimeter of the yard 3 times in her wolf form before she became aware that someone was watching her from the far corner. She stopped. Her wolf did something she had never known it to do before. It did not growl. It did not lower into a defensive posture. It went very still, the way prey animals went still, except that her wolf was not prey, and it did not feel afraid. It felt something else entirely. Something she did not have a name for. Something like the moment before lightning struck, when all the air went electric and taut, and everything in the world held its breath. The man in the corner of the training yard was tall and dark, and very still, standing with his arms folded and his back against the stone wall, watching her with an expression she could not read from this distance. He was wearing no crown. He did not need one. The authority was simply in him, the way the cold was in winter air, ambient and total, and not requiring any further announcement. She shifted back. The change was faster for her than for most wolves, almost instantaneous, one of the various things about her that her father's pack had never been. able to explain or categorize. She was standing in the gray dawn light in her training clothes, her white hair loose around her shoulders, looking across the yard at the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and he was looking back at her. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "Serafina Voss," he said finally. His voice was not what she had expected. She had expected something commanding and declarative, the voice of a man accustomed to rooms quieting when he spoke. His voice was quieter than that, carefully controlled, as though he had learned long ago to conserve his authority rather than spend it freely. "Alpha King," she said, and inclined her head. Not a bow. He noticed. "Your wolf is white," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have never seen a wolf that color," he said. "No," she agreed. "Neither had anyone else." He was quiet for a moment. "Does it have a name?" he asked, and the question was so unexpected, so unlike anything she had prepared herself for, that she felt something shift behind her sternum, a small, dangerous loosening of the tightly held composure she had been maintaining for 9 days. Nobody had ever asked her wolf's name. Nobody had ever thought to. They had only ever wanted to know how to control it. "Not one I have spoken aloud," she said carefully. He looked at her for another long moment. "Come eat breakfast," he said then, and turned and walked back toward the keep. And after a moment, because she did not know what else to do, she followed. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. Breakfast was a revelation, not because of the food, though the food was significantly better than what had been provided to visiting dignitaries in her father's hall, where hospitality and generosity were applied with the strategic precision of diplomatic tools. It was a revelation because of how he ate it. He sat at a table in a small room off the main kitchens that she would learn was where he took most of his informal meals, and he ate with efficiency and without ceremony, and he asked her questions. Not the questions she had been bracing for, the careful diplomatic inquiries about her father's territory, and the health of the Northern Reaches pack, and what specific expertise she had been sent to contribute to the king's court. He asked her what she had noticed in her first 9 days. She looked at him across the small table, and calculated how honest to be. And her wolf, which had been attending this conversation with the focused interest of an animal that knew something important was happening, pushed her toward a decision she was not certain she was ready to make. "Your advisors are afraid of something," she said. "Not of you. They respect you genuinely. But there is something they are not telling you, and it has been building for at least several months, based on how they carry it." He was quiet for a moment. "What makes you think they are not telling me?" he said. "Because you are watching them the same way I am," she said. "And you would not need to watch them if you already knew." He looked at her for a long moment after that, and what she saw in his expression was not displeasure. It was something that functioned, if she had to name it, as relief. "Your father's letter described you as difficult," he said. "My father's letter was designed to make you solve me," she said. And she watched his expression very carefully when she said it, looking for the confirmation that this was indeed what had been intended, that she was not merely being paranoid. What she saw was not confirmation exactly. It was acknowledgement. The small, precise nod of a man who had already known what he was being handed and had made decisions about it that he was not yet ready to share. "Tell me what your wolf refused to do," he said. "It refused to submit," she said, "to my father, to any alpha. It has always refused." "Why?" he asked. She met his eyes. They were darker than she had expected from a man with his coloring, very nearly black, and they were looking at her with a quality of attention she was not accustomed to, the kind of attention that suggested he was actually listening rather than waiting for information he could use. "I do not know," she said, which was true. "But I think," she added, which was the part that was less certain, "that it is not defiance. It is recognition. It does not submit because it is waiting for something it has not yet." Found. He was quiet for a long time after that. And has it found it? He asked. Her wolf surged inside her, warm and insistent. I do not know yet, she said. It was almost the truth. The thing about Kalen Drakkar she was learning was that he moved through the world with the patience of someone who had internalized a very long view of time. He did not push. He did not position. He waited, as Declan had told her, with the calm of a man who understood that most things eventually became clear. If you gave them sufficient space, over the weeks that followed their first meeting, she found herself encountering him in the way you encountered weather, regularly and without formal arrangement, in the corridors and the training yard and the library that occupied the entire north tower of the keep, and that she had discovered on her third day, and had been spending a significant portion of her time in since. He would find her there sometimes, in the evening, sitting with a book about the historical politics of the Wolf Territories, and he would sit across from her with his own documents, and they would be quiet together in the particular quality of quiet that she was beginning to understand was one of his languages. He was a man who used silence the way other people used words, deliberately and precisely, and she was developing the ability to read it, which felt like learning a new alphabet. Some silences were simply comfortable, the absence of unnecessary noise. Some were thoughtful, the space between one idea and the next. Some, increasingly, were the kind that had texture and heat, that occupied the air between two people like a third presence in the room, that made her very aware of the precise distance between her chair and his. She was also learning about Lady Isolde Vera. This was unavoidable. Lady Isolde occupied a particular position in the court of Drakkar Keep that could not be called official and could not be ignored. The position of the person. Everyone understood to be the primary candidate for a role that had not yet been offered. She was 28, the eldest daughter of one of the most powerful alpha families in the Southern Territories, her mother the alpha of her own pack, and her father the head of the King's Trade Council, which meant that Isolde herself represented a confluence of political advantages that any strategic marriage negotiator would have noticed from across a very large room. She was also extraordinarily beautiful, the kind of beautiful that looked curated. Every element of her appearance deployed to maximum effect. Dark hair and pale skin, and enormous gray eyes, and a figure she moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had always understood its power. She was intelligent, clearly, and politically sophisticated, and she was kind to Serafina in the specific way of someone who had assessed a situation and determined that kindness was the correct weapon. You must find it strange. Here, Isolde said to her one morning, appearing beside her in the corridor that led from the great hall to the east wing with the smooth inevitability of someone who had arranged the encounter. After the northern reaches, Drakkar is so very different. Very different, Serafina agreed pleasantly. I find the differences interesting. Isolde smiled. It was a beautiful smile, practiced to the point of reflex. You are adaptable, she said. Alpha Voss's letter suggested you would be. Serafina felt the surface of the words and understood what was underneath them. Isolde knew what the letter had said. Of course she did. She was exactly the kind of person who made sure to know things like that. My father is very observant, Serafina said, which committed to nothing, and excused herself to attend a training session she had not actually scheduled, but invented on the spot, walking away down the corridor with the measured pace of someone who had not just been threatened and was not alarmed. She was alarmed. Not by Isolde herself, whose intelligence she respected, and whose political position she understood. She was alarmed by the particular combination of what she was beginning to feel about Kalen Drakkar, and what she was beginning to understand about the political reality in which those feelings existed. Because the mate bond, when it was real, when it was the true bond, and not the pale approximation that sometimes manifested between compatible wolves who chose each other for reasons of affection or practicality, could not be managed or negotiated. It simply was. And she was beginning to understand, with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that what she had been feeling since the moment she saw Kaelin Drakkar watching her from across the training yard at dawn was not admiration or attraction or the complicated feelings that arose naturally between two powerful wolves in close proximity. It was recognition. The same recognition her wolf had been practicing for 23 years in its refusal to submit to anything that was not the right thing, now confronted with a thing that was. She did not tell him. She was not ready to tell him. She did not know if he felt the same thing. And the uncertainty was its own kind of terror. Because if she was wrong, if this was one-sided, if the recognition was hers alone, and he saw her as an interesting problem his court had been handed rather than as the person the old stories described as a mate's equal half, then the exposure of saying it aloud would be a wound she was not certain she could recover from. She was also aware, with the tactical clarity she had developed in 23 years of managing a wolf that everyone around her considered a liability, that this was not only her decision to make. If the bond was real, it would eventually make itself known, regardless of what either of them chose to do about it. The question was whether they would acknowledge it before. Circumstances forced the acknowledgement. The circumstances arrived in the form of the blood moon ritual, and they arrived faster than she had expected. The announcement came at the end of a council meeting she had not been invited to attend, but whose aftermath she witnessed in the controlled efficiency of the keep's response. The sudden increased activity among the household staff, the arrival of messengers from several of the subordinate pack territories, the appearance of Mira in the corridor. Outside Serafina's quarters early on a Tuesday morning, with the expression of someone delivering information that required significant management. The blood moon ritual, Mira said without preamble. You know what it is? I know the historical version, Serafina said carefully. The ritual in which the Alpha King declares his true mate before the assembled alphas of all the territories. The ritual in which the Alpha King declares his true mate, or his chosen political mate, Mira corrected, with the precision of someone who understood the distinction to be important. The two are not always the same. In the case of this particular ritual, which has not been held in 40 years, because the previous two kings died before reaching the ceremonially appropriate age, the declaration must be made under the light of the blood moon itself, which amplifies the honesty required. Under blood moon light, a false declaration will fail. The bond will not seal. Every alpha present will see it. Fail. She paused. The ritual is in 3 weeks. Serafina was quiet for a moment. And he is not declared, she said. No, Mira said. He has not. Another pause, longer this time. He has asked for you, Mira added. Now, in his study. His study was at the top of the North Tower, above the library she had been spending her evenings in, and she had never been in it before. She was admitted by a guard who had clearly been expecting her, and who opened the door without comment, and she stepped into a room that immediately told her things about Kaelin Drakkar that she had not known before. It was large, and ordered with the fierce precision of someone who used order as a coping mechanism. Every document in its place, every book aligned, the single window looking north toward the territories that bore his name, and he was standing at that window when she entered, looking out, and he did not turn immediately when she came in. She understood that he needed a moment, and she gave it. To him, standing inside the door and looking at his back, and trying to hold herself very still, because her wolf was pressing against the inside of her skin with an urgency that was becoming difficult to manage. I need to tell you something, he said finally, still facing the window. All right, she said. He turned then. His face was not performing anything. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, exactly as uncertain as she felt. I have known since the first morning in the training yard, he said. What the bond is, what it means. I have not said anything because I did not know if you felt it, and I did not want to be wrong about this. She felt something unlock inside her chest, with an almost physical sensation. A tension releasing that had been held for so long it had begun to feel like structure. I have known too, she said. Since the same morning. He looked at her for a long moment. Then we have a problem, he said. And despite everything, despite the weight of the ritual and the political reality, and Lady Isolde and the assembled alphas who would arrive in 3 weeks to witness whatever happened under the blood moon, something in his voice when he said it suggested that he did not actually find this to be an unwelcome problem. Tell me the problem, she said, because I suspect I already know it. The alphas will not accept an unbonded mate declaration, he said. If I declare under the blood moon and the bond is not sealed, it fails. Publicly. And a bond seals only when both wolves acknowledge it. He paused. Your wolf does not submit, he said. Not to anything. Not to anything that did not deserve it, she said quietly. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. The silence that followed was long and textured, and full of everything they had been not saying to each other for 6 weeks. Serafina was aware of him the way she was always aware of him now, his presence in the room a distinct weight, the particular warmth and scent and aliveness of him that her wolf tracked with an accuracy she was still learning to live inside. Your wolf refused my father, he said. It was not a question, but she heard the question in it. My wolf refuses anyone who does not understand what it is, she said carefully. And what is it? He asked. She had never said it aloud. She had known it, in the way she had known many things without being able to explain the knowing, since she was perhaps 12 years old and had spent an entire night in the forest after a failed submission ceremony, lying on the cold ground with the enormous white wolf lying beside her, and looking at the stars and feeling, for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where and what she was supposed to be. But saying it aloud was different. Saying it aloud made it real in a way that was permanent and irreversible. And she was still 23 years old, and she had spent 23 years being the problem her father did not know how to solve, and she was standing in the study of the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, with 3 weeks until a ritual that would determine the political future of every wolf in the territories, and her wolf was pressing against the inside of her skin, with the insistence of something that was done waiting, and so she said it. It is ancient, she said. Older than this pack. Older than this territory. It carries a bloodline that was old when the first Drakkar came to power. She paused. My mother was not a pack wolf, she said. She was a wild wolf, the kind from the stories, the kind that do not have packs, and do not have alphas, and do not submit to anything that is not the moon itself. She watched his face as she said it. My father did not know, or he knew, and chose not to examine what it meant. But my wolf has always known what it is, and it has spent 23 years waiting for someone who knew it too. He crossed the room. She did not move. He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, and she looked up at him, and his expression had a quality she had not seen in it before, an openness that was not vulnerability, but was something adjacent to it, the face of a man who had lowered a guard he rarely lowered. I know what you are, he said, and his voice was very quiet. I knew it the morning in the yard, when you shifted back and looked at me and your wolf did not growl. Do you know what that means? That a wild wolf does not growl at you? It means you are not a threat, she said. No, he said. It means I am recognized. He raised his hand, and she stayed very still as he touched her jaw, just the tips of his fingers, the lightest possible contact, and the effect of it moved through her like lightning through a copper wire, her wolf surging forward with a warmth and certainty that she felt as a kind of completion, the sensation of a circuit that had been incomplete. Suddenly closing. Say its name, he said. What? She breathed. Your wolf, he said. Say its name, not to anyone else, to me. Because you said you have a name you have not spoken aloud. She looked at him for a long moment. Saying a true name was not a small thing. Saying a true name to someone was an act of trust, that in the old traditions was understood to be irrevocable, a gift that could not be taken back, a key that once given could not be unmade. She was aware of all of this. She said, "It anyway." She said it softly, almost a whisper, the old word in the old language that her wolf had given her years ago in a quiet forest under winter stars, the name that meant something like, "She who remembers the first fire." And when she finished saying it, Kaelin Drakar's eyes changed, a shift in their darkness that was not quite human, the wolf in him surfacing for a moment to look at her directly. And what she felt from him in that moment was not dominance or possession, but recognition. The same recognition she had been waiting her entire life for someone to offer her. "Seraphina," he said, and the way he said it was different from how anyone had ever said her name, as though he meant not just the name she had been given but everything it contained. All of her, the difficult parts and the frightening parts, and the parts she had never been able to explain to anyone. "I am going to declare you at the ritual," he said, "if you will allow it." The phrasing undid something in her. She had been brought here to be disposed of, delivered as a problem to be managed, and he was asking her permission. "The Alphas will not like it," she said, finding her voice. "No," he agreed. "Lady Isolde will be furious," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "My wolf has never sealed a bond," she said. "I do not know if it will." He looked at her steadily. "I do," he said. She took a breath. "Then yes," she said, "I allow it." And her wolf, for the first time in 23 years, went completely quiet inside her. Not the restless, vibrating silence of something that was waiting, but the deep, still silence of something that had arrived. The 3 weeks that preceded the blood moon ritual were the most complicated of her life. She had anticipated hostility from the court, and she received it, delivered through the channels available to sophisticated people who operated in an environment where direct confrontation was considered poor form, the social exclusions and pointed courtesies and the particular quality of conversation that communicated, without ever directly saying, that she was perceived as an interloper who had done something inadmissible by being chosen. Lady Isolde handled the development with a grace that Seraphina genuinely admired, even while she recognized it as a campaign. She did not rage or weep or create scenes. She recalibrated with the efficiency of someone who had prepared contingencies and activated them without fuss, redirecting her energy toward being visibly supportive of the ritual and visibly composed about its implications, which positioned her as the noble party in a way that was tactically sophisticated and probably quite painful underneath, because Seraphina had spent enough time watching Isolde to understand that beneath the political machinery, she was a person who had wanted this very specifically and had been working toward it for years. She felt complicated things about this that she did not have time to fully examine. What she did examine, in the evenings in the library that Kaelin increasingly shared with her, was the historical record of the blood moon ritual itself. She read everything available, which was considerable, the accounts of the 2 rituals that had been held in the previous century and the older fragmentary records of earlier ceremonies, and what she found both reassured and terrified her. The ritual itself was not complicated. The Alpha King stood in the ceremonial circle, which was drawn on the ground of the ritual clearing in the old symbols of the first packs, and declared his mate under the light of the blood moon, which rose only once every several decades in the particular confluence of lunar cycles that created it. If the bond was true, the moon would seal it, a physical sensation described in every account as unmistakable. If the bond was not true, nothing would happen, and the assembled alphas would witness the failure, and the political and social consequences of that failure were significant and permanent. What the historical records also made clear was that in every successful ritual, the mate's wolf had submitted to the alpha before the declaration. It was considered part of the ceremony, the physical expression of the bond's sealing. Her wolf had never submitted to anyone. She read this information in the library on a Wednesday evening 2 weeks before the ritual, and sat with it for a long time in the silence that gathered around her. And then Kaelin came in and sat across from her and looked at the book she had been reading, and the expression on his face told her that he already knew. "You have read the histories," she said. "I wrote a paper on this ritual when I was 17, he said, which was not quite an answer. "My wolf will not submit," she said. "I know," he said. "Every account of a successful ritual includes it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Every account of a successful ritual that was between two wolves of the same kind," he said. Carefully. She looked at him. "You have thought about this," she said. "I have thought about very little else for 6 weeks," he said. He leaned forward, and in the warm light of the library, his face was very intent. The original ritual texts, not the historical accounts of the ceremonies but the founding documents themselves, describe what is needed differently. They say the bond seals, when each wolf recognizes the other truly. Recognition can look different ways. Your wolf has already recognized mine. Mine recognized yours the morning in the yard." He paused. "I believe the ritual will seal," he said. "But I cannot promise you it will. I want to be clear about that. I cannot promise you." She looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said. "That is not why I said yes." His eyes warmed. Something subtle but unmistakable. "Why did you say yes?" he asked. She thought about it seriously. The real answer, rather than the diplomatic one. "Because my wolf has been waiting for something it recognized," she said, "and it found it. And I am not going to let the fact that the recognition is complicated talk me out of the thing that is finally right." The night before the ritual, Lady Isolde found her on the south terrace. Serafina had gone there because she could not sleep, and the cold air helped her think, and she had been standing at the stone railing looking at the territory spreading out below the keep, the forests and the frozen lakes and the distant mountains, all of it belonging to a man who had asked her permission before declaring her his mate. And she heard footsteps and turned, and found Isolde standing a few feet away looking at the same view. They stood in silence for a moment. "I am not going to try to stop it," Isolde said finally. Her voice was carefully neutral, the voice of someone maintaining composure through considerable effort. "I am not asking you to," Serafina said. "I know," Isolde said. Another pause. "You should know that I am not your enemy," Isolde said. "I wanted this. I worked toward it. I was prepared to be good at it. That is different from being your enemy." Serafina looked at her. She believed this. "I know," she said. Isolde looked at her for a long moment with the gray eyes that were beautiful and intelligent, and currently doing the careful work of managing something real. "Your wolf," Isolde said. "He says it is unlike anything he has encountered. He does not frighten easily, and it does not frighten him." "No," Serafina agreed. "What does that feel like?" Isolde asked, and for the first time the political surface of her dropped slightly, and what was underneath was simply a person asking a real question. Serafina thought about it honestly. "Like being known," she said. "Like finally being exactly what you are, and having that be the reason, rather than the problem." Isolde was quiet for a moment. "I hope it seals," she said finally, and turned and walked back inside, and Serafina stood in the cold, with her wolf very still inside her, and thought that she did too. The morning of the ritual, the assembled alphas began arriving at dawn. By mid-morning, 12 alpha leaders from across the territories had been received and accommodated in the keep's formal guest quarters, their wolves moving through the corridors with the careful awareness of powerful animals in unfamiliar territory, sizing up each other and the environment with the efficiency of predators who could afford to be polite, but were never actually relaxed. Serafina moved through this carefully, spending most of the morning in her room, and the hour before the ceremony in the small preparation room adjacent to the ritual clearing. where Mira came to help her dress and conducted this task with the focused efficiency she applied to everything, saying almost nothing except the practical necessities of buttons and posture and where to stand. "You are afraid," Mira said finally, not as a question, when Serafina was fully dressed and standing in the center of the room. "Yes," Serafina said. "Good," Mira said. "People who are not afraid of important things are dangerous." She paused. "He is afraid too," she added. "He would not want you to know that. But you should." Serafina felt something soften in the tight coil of her nerves. "Does it work?" she asked. "What Kaylin believes about the original texts. Does it work that way?" Mira looked at her for a long moment. "In my grandmother's time," she said, "there was a wild wolf bonded to a pack alpha, the old kind like yours. She did not submit in the ceremony." She paused. "They were bonded for 60 years, she said." Serafina took a breath. "Thank you," she said. Mira straightened an imaginary crease in Serafina's sleeve. "Do not thank me," she said. "Go seal a bond." The clearing was lit by torches at its perimeter, and by the rising blood moon itself, which was larger than a regular moon and deeply red at its edges, the color of garnets, of old wine, of something that had been ancient before any of them were born. The assembled alphas stood in 2 arcs on either side of the ceremonial circle, 12 powerful wolves in formal dress, their faces composed into the careful neutrality of people who were watching something consequential and had opinions about it that they were holding in reserve. Kaylin was already in the circle when she entered the clearing, standing at its center in the dark and formal dress of the ritual. Tradition. And he looked at her when she appeared, and his expression was the unguarded one, the face he had shown her in his study, and she felt her wolf warm in response. She walked to the edge of the circle and stopped. The tradition was that she would enter the circle when invited. She waited. He held her gaze across the ceremonial space. "Serafina Voss of the Northern Reaches," he said, and his voice was clear and carried easily in the cold night air. "I ask you to enter the circle." She entered. She felt the symbols under her feet as she crossed the threshold. A faint vibration, old and deep, the accumulated intention of every ritual that had ever been performed in this place. She stopped before him. His eyes on hers were very steady. "I am going to declare you," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "And then I am going to ask you something. And whatever you answer, it is true. Do you understand?" She did not entirely understand, but she nodded. He turned to face the assembled alphas. His voice, when he used it for declarations, was different. It had weight and resonance, the quality of a bell that had been correctly cast. "I declare before the assembled alphas of the Northern Territories, under the light of the blood moon, my true mate," he said, "Serafina Voss." The silence was complete and complete and complete. The blood moon hung above them all, and its light was very red. He turned back to her. The question he had said he would ask was not one she had anticipated. "Serafina," he said quietly, only for her, "what is my wolf's name?" She stopped breathing for a moment. He was asking her. He was giving her the same gift she had given him in the study, the true name, the irrevocable key, the thing that could not be unmade once offered. It meant he trusted her with it. It meant he was meeting her exactly where she was. She looked at his wolf behind his eyes, and she knew. The same way she had always known things her brain could not explain. The ancient knowledge her blood carried. She said it. The word was from the same old language as her wolf's name, and it meant something like, "the one who holds the North in his hands without closing his fist." She watched his face as she said it, and she saw the moment it landed. The same recognition she had felt in the study, his wolf surfacing behind his eyes to look at her directly. What happened next was beyond anything the historical accounts had prepared her for. Her wolf moved inside her. With a power and certainty she had never felt from it, Not explosive, but deep. The way rivers moved. The way tides moved. Inevitable and enormous and already in motion before you realized it had begun. It did not submit. It reached. It reached across the space between her wolf and his wolf, with the same motion that ancient things used when they recognized each other. Not surrender, but communion. Not yielding, but meeting. And she felt Kalen's wolf reach back. And in the space where those two recognitions met, the bond sealed. She felt it as heat and light, and the particular sensation of something that had always been slightly displaced, finally arriving at its correct location. Around them, in the clearing, the blood moon's red light shifted, deepened, poured down on the ceremonial circle with an intensity that was visible and unmistakable. The 12 assembled alphas witnessed it. Every wolf in the clearing felt it. The bond was sealed. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming? What happened in the clearing after the bond sealed was not what she had expected, which was to say that what she had expected was controlled and formal, and what actually happened was that Kalen Drakkar looked at her with his wolf fully present behind his eyes and said quietly, "Are you all right?" And the question was so ordinary and so careful, and so entirely him that she laughed, which was not ceremonially appropriate, but was entirely genuine. And he smiled, which was the first time she had seen him smile without any management in it. And this was witnessed by 12 assembled alphas and the entire household of Drakkar Keep, and recorded in the official accounts of the ritual as an unusual, but not unprecedented demonstration of mutual recognition. The 12 alpha leaders were required by tradition to formally acknowledge the declaration, which they did, in order of seniority, each. Approaching the circle's edge, to offer the words that had been used for this purpose for 3 centuries, words that essentially said, "We see what the moon has shown us, and we accept it." They said these words. Some of them said them more warmly than others. 2 of the younger alphas, from territories that had historically been allied with Isolde's family's political interests, said them with the precise tone of people who were complying, because the moon had made argument impossible, but who were filing reservations internally. She noted this and decided it was a problem for later. For now, in the cold clearing under the blood moon, what she felt was her wolf lying quiet and warm inside her, finally still in a way that was not resignation, but satisfaction, the deep, satisfied stillness of something that had completed what it came to do. The formal reception that followed the ritual was where she learned something new about what it meant to be the declared mate of the Alpha King. People moved differently around her. Not just the deference that had been offered to her as a visiting dignitary, which had always had underneath it the particular quality of people accommodating a guest they were not entirely sure about. This was something else. The bond was sealed and every wolf present could feel it. The connection between her and Kalen as a real and present thing. And this changed the arithmetic of how she was perceived in ways that were both practical and symbolic. She was not a problem that had been sent here, and that might be managed. She was the king's true mate, declared under the blood moon, sealed by the moon itself, and that was not a thing that could be argued with, or managed or politically negotiated around. She watched this reorientation happen in real time and felt, underneath the complexity of everything else she was holding, something that was simply relief. Not triumph. Not vindication. Relief at the straightforwardness of being finally and completely seen. Declan found her near the end of the reception and pressed a cup of warm wine into her hands and said, "I knew," with the expression of someone who had been hoping for this and was quietly delighted. "Did you?" she said. "Your wolf," he said. "The morning you arrived, the way it settled when you crossed the gate. I have never seen a wolf settle like that in an unfamiliar place. I thought, this one is home." She looked at him. "You did not say anything," she said. "You were not ready to hear it," he said simply. And she found she could not argue with this. Lady Isolde approached her before the reception ended. She was composed and elegant, and there was something in her face that was genuine rather than performed. "Congratulations," she said. And it was not the word that mattered, but the way she said it, without irony and without armor, directly. "Thank you," Serafina said, and meant it. "The council will be difficult," Isolde said. "The two from the Western Territories, Aldrin and Voss, they will not make this simple. They have investments in the political arrangement that was assumed before this." "I know," Serafina said. "I was paying attention." Isolde looked at her for a moment with the intelligent gray eyes that had been, Serafina thought, genuinely formidable in their design for a different outcome. "Good," she said. "You will need to be." She paused. "My family's trade connections in the Southern Corridor," she added carefully, "are not inconsiderable. If they were extended through this court rather than through a personal alliance, they would benefit both parties." Serafina looked at her steadily. "You are proposing a professional relationship," she said. "I am proposing," Isolde said, "that we are both intelligent enough not to waste each other as enemies." Serafina considered this. Her wolf, so recently settled and warm, offered its opinion in the form of a quiet certainty that read, in whatever language wolves used for communication, as approval. "I think," she said, "that I can agree to that." Something in Isolde's expression softened very slightly, the smallest possible degree, and then she nodded and moved away. And Serafina stood with her warm wine in the warm light of the reception, and thought about what it meant to build things out of the materials you were actually given, rather than the materials you had planned on. Kaelin found her near midnight, when the reception had thinned to the handful of people who were still managing logistics and the kitchen staff collecting the remnants of the formal meal. He moved through the room to where she was standing near the fire and stopped beside her, and they stood quietly together looking at the flames for a moment before he spoke. "Tell me what you are thinking," he said. She considered the honest answer. "I am thinking that I have spent 23 years being the thing that could not be controlled," she said. "And I do not know yet how to be something else." She paused. "I do not want to be controlled," she said. "I know," he said. "That is not what I want from you." "What do you want?" she asked, and she meant it as the genuine question it was, not rhetorical, not performing vulnerability, actually wanting to know. He was quiet for a moment. "I want a partner who is as difficult as the territory requires," he said. "Someone who notices what I miss and tells me what she sees, and does not soften what is true, because she thinks I need protecting from it." He paused. "Your wolf saw that my advisors were hiding something in your first week here. They were. I have known for 3 months that there is a challenge being organized by 2 of the Eastern Pack leaders who believe my territory is too large for one king, and that my failure to take a mate was evidence of political instability. That challenge is going to arrive, probably before the next full moon. And I need someone beside me who is not performing the role but actually doing it." She looked at him. "You knew about the challenge," she said. "Why did you not address it?" "Because I was waiting," he said, and there was something slightly wry in his voice. "For my declared mate to be willing to be declared." She felt the warmth that accompanied his particular kind of humor, understated and dry, and always exactly right. "I should tell you," she said, "that I read my father's letter before I delivered it. I know it was designed to have you dispose of me." "I know you read it," he said. The seal was very slightly off. She stared at him. "You knew," she said. "The entire time." "The entire time," he confirmed. "And you still declared me," she said. "You were not a problem sent to me," he said simply. "You were a wolf sent to the right place by the wrong reasons. There is a significant difference." She turned to face him fully. In the firelight, his face was open, and certain in the way she was learning was his real face, the one he kept for people he trusted completely. And she thought about 23 years of being the wrong frequency in every room she had ever been in, and she thought about the morning in the training yard when she had shifted back and seen him watching her, and her wolf had gone still for the first time she could remember. And she thought about the old language word for what her wolf was, and what his wolf was, and how both of those things had been waiting, separately, to find the thing they recognized. She stepped forward. She kissed him, which was not ceremonially appropriate, and was witnessed by several members of the kitchen staff who would discuss it for weeks. He kissed her back with the same quality he brought to everything, completely, and with his full attention. Her wolf was warm and still, and finally entirely home. In the days between the ritual and the challenge's arrival, she learned what it meant to live in the keep, not as a managed visitor, but as its future queen. The change was not dramatic. It was not announced. It happened. In the small, practical ways that real changes always happened. The guards addressing her differently. The household staff including her in the briefings that had previously been delivered only to Kalen and his advisors. The way the morning meetings about territory administration now had a second chair at the head table, and she was expected to occupy it. She found that she was good at this. Not the ceremonial parts, which she was still learning, the particular protocols of greeting, visiting, dignitaries, and managing the formal dynamics of pack meetings, but the substantive parts, the reading of documents, and the analysis of patterns, and the willingness to say what she saw, rather than what was comfortable to say. This she had been doing her entire life. What was different was that here it was valued rather than managed. Kalen listened to her, not in the performative way of someone who understood the political value of being seen to consult his mate, but in the actual way, changing his positions when her analysis gave him reason to change them, pushing back when he disagreed with a specificity that required her to think more clearly, creating the conditions in which thinking clearly was both necessary and rewarded. She had not known before this what it felt like to be genuinely useful, and the sensation was intoxicating in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with purpose. She was made for this, the same way her wolf had always been made for. Whatever it actually was, and she had simply needed to be in the right place for the making to find its full expression. 3 days after the ritual, the challenge arrived. It came in the form of 2 formal declarations from the alpha leaders of the Eastern Territories, delivered by their representatives and laying out, in the careful language of pack law, a claim that the Northern Territory was too extensive to be governed by a single king, and that its eastern sections should be reorganized under local leadership. The representatives who delivered these declarations were not surprised by the efficiency with which they were received, because efficient administration of incoming challenges was exactly the kind of thing Drakkar Keep was known for. They were perhaps surprised by the person sitting at the Alpha King's right hand when the declarations were formally read into the record, a young woman with white hair and extremely pale eyes, who listened to the entire reading with an expression of careful attention and then said, before the king could respond, Paragraph 4 of the Eastern Territories Compact, signed by both of your Alpha's predecessors 80 years ago, specifically addresses the conditions under which territorial reorganization can be requested. The conditions listed have not been met. You are welcome to dispute this reading, but I suggest you review the compact before you do. There was a silence. The representatives looked at her, and then at each other, and then at the Alpha King, who looked back at them with the expression of a man who was completely unsurprised by what had just happened, and who was also trying not to smile. My mate has an excellent memory for historical documents, he said pleasantly. As do I. You will want to take her advice about the compact review. The representatives departed significantly more quickly than they had arrived. The challenge, when the Eastern Alpha's lawyers had indeed reviewed the compact, was withdrawn. Within the week. She was standing in the library when he found her afterward, exactly where they had spent so many evenings already, in the warm light with books around her, and her wolf quiet, and settled inside her, in the way it would be for the rest of her life. Not the restless waiting quiet, but the satisfied quiet of something complete. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and she looked up, and they looked at each other across the length of the library with the ease of two people who had learned each other's silences and knew how to read them. "The Eastern challenge is resolved," he said. "I know," she said. "Declan told me." She paused. "There will be others," she said, "from the Western Territories. Aldrin is still planning something." "I know," he said. "We will handle it." "We." She turned the word over and felt her wolf turn with it, recognizing the shape of it. 23 years of being a problem, being a difficulty, being the thing no one could manage, and now she was half of a we that was genuinely equal, truly equal, the way the old text described a bonded pair. Not one dominant and one submissive, but two forces moving in the same direction, each understanding the other's nature, and finding it not a problem, but a completion. She stood and he crossed the library to her, and when he reached her, he raised his hand and tucked a strand of white hair behind her ear, with the particular gentleness he used when he thought she was working through something and needed careful handling, which she found both amusing and deeply right about him, that he knew when to be careful and when to push. "Tell me what you are thinking," he said. "That I have a name for this now," she said. He looked at her steadily, understanding that she did not mean her wolf's name. "What is it?" he asked. "Home," she said. And her wolf, ancient and wild, and finally arrived, lay down in the deep, warm certainty of that word, and rested,